Hello, my name is Ryan Verbecki, and I'm the Manager of Principal Architects at Virtana. Today we are going to go over a short video on advanced calculation-based filtering. The purpose of this video is to show you some examples of how you can use advanced data-based calculation filtering in VirtualWisdom. The integrations we use in this video are as follows: the fiber channel hardware probe integration for example 1. We will also use the VMware integration for example 2. And for the services report that we will use, we are actually going to create a scratch report with the tables and charts needed to show you the calculation-based filtering. We will now go into a VirtualWisdom demonstration. Once logged in the VirtualWisdom interface, you'll want to go ahead and click on the reporting section. And from here, we're going to go ahead and create a new report. So in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to go ahead and click New Report. And once I click New Report, it's going to give me what I like to call a blank canvas. And here's my first row with an empty chart. So for this demonstration, the first thing we're going to reference is our hardware integration, which is our hardware probes. And I'm going to use some of the metrics around that to show you some of the calculation-based filtering. So what we're going to look at first is I'm going to go ahead and do a trend type chart. I'm going to go ahead and use application as my entity type that I'm going to use. You can obviously pick any other one you want, and what you pick will be dependent on what you're allowed to do from a filtering perspective, but we're going to stick with application. I'm going to go ahead and use one of my hardware-based metrics, which is the one that I'm going to pick for this demo is read payload rate. So this is coming from our hardware probes, and it's calculated based on those hardware probe metrics that we see coming across the line wire data. And I'm going to go ahead and just say okay for now to show you the applications that we have. So in the environment, I have a few different applications. I have a services ESX application. I have a test application. What I'm going to go ahead and do is show you related to filtering now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus sign here, and you're going to see filter applications, or you're going to see filter entities for metric calculation. First one we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and filter by application. I'm going to go ahead and click add and remove. And I'm going to come down and pick the application that I want to use. And in this instance, I'm going to use service-ESX. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to say OK. And when I say OK, I'm now only going to get the trend for that one application that I wanted to look at, because I'm going to use this as the basis for the demo today. Now I want to understand what ESX hosts make up this application. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to add a row below. I'm going to do a similar type thing where I'm going to go ahead and add a trend type chart. I'm going to go ahead and do host. For the host, I'm going to do the same metric as the one that we did before, which was read payload rate. But I'm going to go ahead and filter these hosts related to that application that we did in the first chart. So I'm going to say application here. I'm going to click add remove. And I'm going to pick that application and say, okay, so what this is going to do, it's going to show me the host read payload rate for the hosts that are made up in this application service-ESX. And if I say, okay, what I'm going to get is you're going to see down here we have 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. So we have 8 different servers that make up this application, and this total workload for payload rate is calculated based on the combined workloads of these 8 servers. And you can see that we have these. I'm going to go ahead and how I'll do this is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this tab. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Instead of looking at reports that I'm in, I'm going to take a little shortcut here, and I'm going to go ahead and type inventory. And it'll let me populate the inventory, which you can also get to by just clicking. When it would have come up, I could have clicked on the inventory button. I'm going to go under application, and underneath application, I'm going to go ahead and find that service ESX one. I'm going to go underneath there. When I click on it, you're going to see that it is made up of those 8 servers that we referenced. So the data in the other tab and the chart is accurate for what we're trying to represent. Let's say I showed you related to filtering, so we looked at the hosts that were related to this application that make up this value. So if I look at this particular instance, it's 73.999 megabytes per second. Let's go ahead and just zoom in on one particular time frame here and do a set report time. So what I'm going to do is work with this time frame here, and I'm going to use one of the data points when we had a little bit of a heavier workload. So let's focus on focus on this 10:14:20 a.m. time frame. So in a little over 113 megabytes per second. So if I come down here to 10:14:20, if you look there, if I add those first two together, that's about 110. If I add the remaining stuff together, it makes a little bit of almost around 111, 112, 113 or so. So if I was to add all those data points together, it would come up to this time frame right here where we have 113.225 megabytes per second. So the combined workload of all 8 of those servers equals what this is right here. Now let's say I want to I'm going to teach you how to do the calculation-based filtering using the data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another row below. And when I add this row below, I'm going to go ahead and copy this chart because this is the base level chart I want to use. And I'm going to paste that chart down into this section down here. So now I have the same chart as above, and I wanted to keep the top one there for reference so that we can come back to it. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and click on the configure button for this chart where I selected the metric. And this is where I did the related to this particular application to see what the one application that we wanted to look at and filter out the other ones. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and click add, but I'm going to do this filter entities for metric calculation. And what I'm going to say is for this one, let me move this over just a little bit so you can see in the background. You can see what the busiest hosts are. It's this blue and green line. And if I look at the blue and green line, the busiest ones in there is going to be UCS 16 and UCS 14. If I come in here and I say, let's go ahead and change this to host, but I'm going to say hosts that are not in this list, and I'm going to pick up that UCS 16, and I'll go ahead and grab, I believe it was the UCS 14 as well. And if I say okay, it's going to say now to show me the application. I want to look at this application, which is service SGSX, but I'm going to say calculate the reload payload rate, but do not use the hosts basically that are in this list, which is 16 and 14, which make up part of that application. So now when I say okay, you're going to see that it shows I'm doing 48.511 megabytes per second at this time frame. Well, these other two spikes that we were looking at from up here, this 10:14:20, if I come down here to 10:14:20, these two spikes, which were UCS 16 and UCS 14, are now gone, and now I can see at that 10:14:20 that I'm only showing 2.559 megabytes per second. It's because I filtered out the metrics related to these hosts pertaining to this application. So that is one example of using the calculation-based filter using the data that we collect in the different metrics. You can also use this in other scenarios with some of our software-based integrations. So I'm going to go ahead and add a row below. And this time I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do another trend chart, and I'm going to go ahead and grab a ESX cluster this time to show you one of our software integrations where we can do similar thing. So I'm going to say ESX cluster. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and pick under compute and VMware. In this instance, I'm going to go ahead and just use CPU utilization. So I'm going to say CPU utilization, and I'm going to filter it to a specific cluster just like we did above to kind of remove some of the noise. And out of this list, let's say I decide to pick, let's grab services prod. So if I grab our services prod cluster and I say, okay, I'm now going to show that this is my CPU utilization. So basically every ESX host in this cluster adds up to this percentage of utilization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another row below, just like we did before. This time I'm going to do the same trend chart, but I'm going to change it to ESX host. And I'm going to pick the same metric, which is CPU utilization, and I'm going to filter it, the ESX hosts, related to that same cluster. So I'm going to grab ESX cluster, and I'm going to say services prod. So now it'll show me, let me make sure it's selected, yep. Now it's going to show me everyone that's related to services prod. So you can see during these time frames in some of these examples, like right here at 10:20, I'm doing 19.116% at the cluster level. And if I come down here, the individual hosts are doing this much. So I can come in here and basically remove 2 of these by doing the exact same thing as I did before. I'm going to go ahead and copy this chart. I'm going to add a row below. I'm going to paste in this chart for our base level trend, but now I'm going to tell it to remove, and let me scoot this over, these two hosts, UCS 14 and UCS 16. So I'm going to say calculation-based filter. I'm going to say compute ESX host. I'm going to say not in this list, and I'm going to add the UCS, was it 14 and 16 again? And I'm going to say okay. So I'm going to say, look at this cluster, this particular cluster, and calculate the data not using the metrics from UCS 14 and UCS 16. And if I say okay, if I grab that same timestamp we looked at above, which is at 1020, where I was doing 19.116, if I come down below, I'm doing 14.547, and that's because I went in and I removed the metrics for UCS 14 and 16. So that's a couple of examples of how we do calculation-based filtering using the filter entities for metric calculation advanced type filtering. So in summary, with the advanced calculation-based filtering demo, we provided an understanding of the calculation-based filter. We showed multiple examples of how to use the calculation-based filter around using data from our hardware integration as well as our VMware integration. Additional things that you need to consider when you're doing the advanced level filtering is what options are available to you will be dependent on the entity type, the entity and metric that you select. So depending on that combination, you may or not be able to do some of the advanced filtering options that I walked through in this video today. This concludes our video on advanced calculation-based filtering. I want to thank you for watching.